We've been having some very interesting conversations about the presidents and going to eventually crown the worst president of the United States and all of that. Who knows? We might even have some other contests about the worst vice president or the worst first lady or the worst world leader in general. Who knows? We may do that eventually. But it was after I put out a LinkedIn poll and got a tremendous amount of responses that we started these weekly shows, and they've been some very engaging discussions, and we're hoping that some other people will come and join in the discussion. We do know that some people are out of town, including Nick Palveda, one of the founders of the network, doing some business work in New York and every place else, but we've still been continuing our dialogue and our conversations and things along those lines. And of course, we had some very interesting names, including Abe Lincoln, because I know Kim wanted Abe Lincoln in, and so I added Abe Lincoln to the list, along with, of course, Clinton, Trump, and there is a fourth one as well, and I'll bring that up in a second, and we'll have our discussion, and hopefully some people will be joining in on the discussion. One of the things that happens within the course of world leaders, and particularly presidents, is that sometimes they have influences on our judicial system. So even though he's not on the list, even though a lot of people have been asking him to be on the list, a lot of people are going to be paying attention to that part of the presidency now that one of the justices has decided to step down and retire. I did see that earlier, and we do know that that has happened with some of the past presidents as well, since the Supreme Court oftentimes is a body that is influencing a lot of things in our world and is going to be definitely still continuing that. I mean, the Supreme Court is involved in everything from Roe versus Wade to affirmative action to a number of other things that the president is tied into. And we do know that quite a few presidents have picked quite a few of the Supreme Court judges. There might have been a president or two that only picked one, and then there might have been some that picked several. So in this particular case, Mr. Biden will get to pick his first one. I'm sure he may have given some advice to Obama when he was vice president, but in terms of the pick coming from him and the folks in the Congress, this will be his first attempt, since it does look like we have one of the justices stepping down and getting ready to retire and all of that. So this is that whole conversation we're having around the world's worst president. I'm gonna see if I can't find that particular banner while we're talking and everything, because like I said, this is more of a show that usually Nick produces, so we just might stick with our old banners since that's the ones that I know. But hopefully folks will pop in and they'll enjoy our conversation about the worst president and things along those lines. I'm going to look up some of the things that I found out in terms of our results from LinkedIn. But really quickly, Sasha, while we wait, hopefully for some of our other guests to hopefully appear as well, what are some of the things that you have learned? And do you think that there will be people reflecting on the power of the presidency when it comes to one of the other branches? Because we know here in the United States, there's a lot of talk around the legislative branch, the executive branch, and of course, one of those branches is the judicial branch, and the Supreme Court is the ultimate level of the judicial. So I'm just wondering, do you think, because he's already got some very low numbers, so maybe Biden might run into even lower numbers if he picks the wrong person. But I just wondering your thoughts, as this is fairly breaking news. It's not that breaking, but I think it happened earlier today that he said the Justice Breyer, I believe it was, that he was going to be stepping down and all of that. But what is your thoughts about the presidents of the past, as well as maybe even how much other branches influence our perception of them?
U.S. has a peculiar political system. It's quite complicated. It's evolving, but way too slow, because society, I think, is evolving and changing much faster than U.S. political system. So right now, the right way to do it, if a couple of more judges, or even all of them, hopefully would resign, then just pack all the transgenders and LGBTQ community over there, and same thing to do in Senate and the House. And it all has to be inclusive. Don't forget that all these politicians, they're making, say, about $200,000 plus free parking at the Washington International Airport. So why LGBTQ community shouldn't be allowed to fill these spots and also have share of the proceeds. Because all this political theater, it's nothing more than all this, oh, the judge has resigned, so we have to appoint a new judge. Oh, we're going to go for this guy. No, this guy is not so good. Let's go for that guy. He's better. Okay, let's go for that. I mean, this is all political theater. It has nothing to do with the everyday's life of people in the United States. And they just have to consume this little show and spend time discussing that and going to that and discuss what's happened here and whether this person is the right one or maybe that person is better. It's I don't buy it. It's just really very cheap political show.
And speaking of political shows and everything, I know that you are not the biggest fan. And like I said, I know Adam has been here a couple of times, and sometimes he doesn't believe that systematic racism exists, but he also sometimes thinks that Trump is the greatest president since all times and all those things along those lines. And that might be putting slight words in his mouth, but definitely I know he's a bigger fan than we are sometimes giving him credit for. But I know that you are not the biggest fan of Mr. Trump. So that is one of the people that was on our list. So I'd just love to hear your thoughts around why Mr. Trump should be the worst president, and then we'll get to some of the other ones as well. I know, and I'm hoping that Kim comes in. She is not a fan of Lincoln. I'm not sure why, other than the fact that she is a Southern woman, and of course that was around the time of slavery and things of that nature. So I'm not exactly sure what her issues are with Mr. Lincoln, but hopefully she'll come in and share with us what it is. And she did get some support. She did have a couple of people that joined her in not liking Lincoln within that poll and everything. But I would love to hear your thoughts about Mr. Trump while we think about some of the other folks. And like I said, hopefully Kim and others will join in and be able to share why they are not the biggest fans of Mr. Lincoln.
About Trump, its situation is very easy. I mean, who could be worse than a president who lost his presidency, lost the House, lost the Senate, uh, impeached not once but twice in 4 year terms? I mean, it's even difficult to comprehend what could be worse than that. I won't even delve into what kind of person he is and what kind of and everything is just unfolding now. Actually, we know very little of what exactly he did. He was about to break complete political system in the United States. He is the first president ever who refused a peaceful transition of power. How much else? I mean, this person is about to become the biggest criminal of all times among U.S. presidents. I even don't remember if there are any other criminals among U.S. presidents. Maybe I'm not so sure. Maybe not
Well, I
even.
mean, I guess technically speaking, Nixon would be considered a criminal since of that whole Watergate thing and everything along those lines, but he was never convicted. I mean, several of his aides and people involved with Watergate were convicted, including some that were in his office and everything. But I cannot think of him ever serving any time or even going to the trial to get to the point of serving any time. So, yeah, you're right. If we actually put him in a prison, unless we go way back in time, there might have been some of them early forefathers that might have spent some time in the brig and everything. But if they did, it was only for a short amount of time. And I'm talking about way back, like back in the frontier era of the presidencies and all of that. And I'd have to do some further research to see if that was the case. I do know they had some duels and some other things between folks that were in political power, but I don't know of any that were in the kind of way that we're talking about that Trump is facing. So definitely that would be something brand new if he has to wear an orange jumpsuit.
Mark, it's very difficult to compare what Nixon did and what Trump did.
Right.
See, all Nixon was trying to, unlawfully for sure, gain advantage for his political party. He was not, as Trump, about to break completely American political system. He was not rebel and cling on to power and refuse peaceful transition and power. Now we are learning apparently that Trump and his people prepared a fake, illegal slate of electors in 7 states Five of them are criminal, two are on the border of being criminal, right? So if that's what Trump did, this is worse. And remember, he was saying that if he would go on a Fifth Avenue and kill somebody, he would never be charged. What
That's what he
he
said.
did is way much worse than if he would kill, say, 55 people on Fifth Avenue in New York City. What he did is many, many times worse. And hopefully the US judicial system will go through that and do the right things.
Yeah, we're gonna
Hopefully.
have to see if they're gonna do the right thing, and that'll be very interesting to see if they actually make that choice or if they sit there and don't do the right thing. But I mean, I have not even. Well, they actually. I was interviewing somebody, and they were bringing up the fact that there is a attorney in Georgia and I think an attorney in New York that are actually pursuing the case against Trump. So yes, there are folks within the judicial system that are actually beginning the paperwork to actually have him prosecuted, tried, and all of that. So that would
Mark,
be a first.
but you remember what circus happened in Georgia? He calls Secretary of State and asks to find 11,800 or so votes.
Yes.
Can you imagine what kind of? I think even Hitler probably would never thought about calling and find me the votes.
Yes, I don't think
Nobody
that's
else. I,
yes.
I can't think of any person in the world, any politician or a president or I think Trump's name should be. Remember, he is from Germany, so uh, as far as I remember, CEO in German is Geschäftsführer.
Mm,
So I can't think of anybody to give a call to find me 11. No, it was, I think I remember, 11,780 votes. That's exactly the number he needed. What a pathetic idiot. Oh my God.
that's just crazy. You're right. It's just amazing that he did that. Now, some of the other names that we had put on the list this time around, like I said, was Abraham Lincoln, and he did get the 4% of the votes and everything. By the way, you'll be glad to know Trump is winning with 69%. Are there any things that you did not like about Mr. Clinton? I know that definitely Trump had some bad points, but that Clinton was on our list, and there are some folks that had him at the top of the list and everything. So I was just wondering, were there any things within the Clinton administration that you personally did not enjoy or that you did not find favorable about Bill? And of course, we know that technically Hillary did win the first election that she ran, even though because she won by the popular vote. But you know that whole electoral college caused her not to win and everything. But I was just wondering, are there any things that you did not like about either of the Clintons?
Um, I think actually Hillary would be a better politician than her husband.
Hmm.
He was, I, I perceive him as a fairly single minded man, fair man. He was not devious at any point of his presidency. He was, um, he was really a reasonable man. I would disregard all story with Levinsky as non-event at all, although he lied under the oath, and that was leading to his impeachment or so on, and all the story. But politically speaking, and as him as a human being, that's non-event. To me, it's really nothing. It's a noise, really, for all what it is. Hillary is extremely smart woman. Maybe she was not careful with all these emails sending from her server or so on. So that again, it's for all it stands, it's again non-event. However, it was played very skillfully against her, and so eventually unfortunately, she lost her chance to become a president in 2008 against Obama. She lost it against Trump. I think she still could be a contender in 2024, especially if Biden will decide not to run. I think she's, in my opinion, she's the first choice for Democrats. Extremely smart woman, uh, She has a high honor to go through those difficult times with Monica Lewinsky's affair and so on. But she made it, and she became Secretary of State, and she did quite well in that regard. And I think she's most of all, I think she's a U.S. United States patriot, and she will do everything in her power to do for country as good as it's possible to do.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I'm sure she'll do that and keep that conversation going and all of that. But one of the things I'm also curious about is, by the way, you mentioned whether he was going to run or not. Apparently, he has stated, and I think that Steve may have mentioned this on one of our recent World editions, that he is going to run and it's going to run with the same ticket. So it does look like Kamala and Joe are going to run to try to get reelected. Now, if there's continuing other problems in the economy and if there's other world things going on, that could all change within the course of time. And of course, the midterms could also determine that. But at least as of now, they are saying that they will try to hold their position in office and all along those lines. And this kind of comes to our conversation around the worst presidents. I was doing one of my other shows, and there was a gentleman that was one of my guests and everything, and he was actually making an interesting argument about politics. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about what he said. He said that he does not feel that we actually have a true democracy. What we have is a democratic republic. And I think that maybe even Shaquille and you have said the same thing. But I was just wondering, when all of this talk about us having a true democracy, is it something that the U.S. really has, or is it more of a democratic republic or one of these other models that is out there and not what we are perceiving it to be in the sense of true democracy?
Well, of course, we don't have, or you in US, we don't have direct democracy because you have electoral college. So
Mhm.
all you do, you elect electoral officials who will then appoint the president, or they
Right.
will reflect their choice for a president or so on. So you don't have direct means to affect who is the president of the United States. And especially now, what we're learning that each state can nominate its electors, and
Mhm.
it can put a fake slate of electors, and it can manipulate that. So eventually, you are in a situation where people are losing their faith in the electoral system of the United States. It cannot be any worse than that. You can compare that only to nuclear tragedy. That's really all what is comparable. Because if you U.S. people are losing faith in the election, in the institute of election, it's done. It's all over.
Yeah, you got a point there and everything. Another thing, because it's one coming back to one of the other names that I had on the list and everything, but I was wondering when it comes to Ronald Reagan, there were some policies that he had, whether it was policies that were eventually initiated by him or policies that were initiated by predecessors of his or folks that came after him and all of that. That were not seen as all that favorable. And I do know that there was an assassination attempt on him, just like there was on Kennedy. In the case of Kennedy, they actually succeeded. In the case of Reagan, they did not. But I was wondering, do you think that part of the reason, and he's not done all that bad, I think he's got like 12% of the votes, but part of the reason that he is still revered isn't so much about his policies, because I do know there were quite a few policies. While there were some that were enjoyable in the sense of some of his economic policies, there were quite a few others that folks did not appreciate it. But then a lot of times we will gather around people when disaster happens, whether that's 9/11 or whether that's a president being assassinated. So in your mind, do you think that he would have been um, still maintained the popularity that he has if one, if he was still living, and two, if he was had not had that attempt placed on his life? Because I think that that might have got some people that didn't even like him to at least give him a second chance because they were looking at the humanity of the man and they were also looking at the impact of his family, like of course looking at how it was impacting Nancy and his kids and all of that. But even within his own family, there were people that had disagreements with him, even around LGBT rights and things of that nature. Because I think there is at least one of the kids that comes out of that culture. But I was just wondering, do you think that that assassination attempt is the reason that he has seen as a stronger figure than maybe he actually was? Of course, he did stand up to Gorbachev. We must acknowledge that.
Um, I think maybe assassination attempt has contributed something to public perception of his political figure. Although I think that he was so strong. He was a great communicator. He had very good policy. He was a persona, a huge, probably he was the biggest among all presidents of the United States as personality is concerned, because I'm not trying to portray him as a god or anything like that. He had his weaknesses, and on the other hand, he has a lot of very strong traits in his personality, and he carried himself so well, even on international scene as with Gorbachev, and at that time it was 1985, and actually I'm studying right now, and I've accumulated a lot of material of what's really happened in the Soviet Union in starting from 1982, because in 1982 that's a time when the Brezhnev passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And while Brezhnev was alive, it was still kind of a monolith system, or at least perceived as such. And all of a sudden, then came Andropov. Ronald Reagan was already in power here, and comes Andropov, and they kind of started to dance a little bit together. And all of a sudden, this Korean airliner in September 83. And everything started to go apart. And Ronald Reagan was strong enough to, first of all, they did it extremely, extremely skillful, the propaganda war about this Korean airliner. There are a lot of it's a huge tragedy when hundreds of innocent people died. Um, but there are some accounts that there was at the same time a spy plane invaded the Russian territory. There were several warnings to this passenger airplane, and eventually they had to concede. Russians, at the end of the day, they were denied everything and so on, but then they had to concede that unfortunately they thought that this U.S. military plane, but it was too late when they discovered that it's actually a passenger liner indeed. And the liner, while he was receiving signals to have a landing, but he was already leaving Russian territory, and if they wouldn't shoot him, he would just leave the territory, and that would be the end of story. But it's much, much more desirable outcome than to kill hundreds of people between you and me. So Ronald Reagan, then he devised this so-called Star Wars scenario, where they would. It's a fantastic scenario, and they had no finances, no technology to implement that for the next 55 years. However, the threats somehow they made it look quite real, and
Yeah.
Russians bought into it. And this
No,
actually what actually went to eventually to demise of the Soviet Union.
no, exactly. And we do have one of our other people coming through and everything. So glad that Dan Worthington was able to join us in this conversation. You know, we're continuing our conversations around the worst president. Steve actually had things going on in his community, and definitely some of our other regulars were busy as well. But we continue these as we get closer and closer to President's Day, which I think is in about 2 or 3 weeks. So we still probably got about 2 or 3 more of these. One of the things that I was going to ask Sasha is one of the names that I know that Kim had said she wanted on there was ironically Mr. Lincoln. And I was just wondering, Dan, if you can think of any reasons that you would have Mr. Lincoln on the list, and why you would even think that somebody would want Mr. Lincoln on the list. And I know when I was doing research, one of the things that came up about him was that apparently in his era, but it's been with a couple of other presidents, there were folks that were feeling that the first lady's voice was too strong. So they were actually saying that maybe he listened a little bit too much to his wife, Mary Todd, in terms of some of the national policies that he put in his presidency. And definitely there was some question about his attitudes toward the military, because apparently there were some generals that were ineffective and some corruption in the army that some people were feeling should have been dealt with that wasn't dealt with. So just doing some of my research, I did hear that argument, and I mean, Chuck, I heard that around, and we had mentioned Reagan earlier too, around Mr. Reagan and Nancy, and of course we definitely heard it with Bill and Hillary. But I was just wondering if there was any reasons that you would think that you would like to have one of the icons of the presidency. Definitely, people, when they think of icons, they think of George Washington and they think of Abraham Lincoln. Who knows? I might put the other icon in the next list, along with a president that is known more as a comedy fodder. Now that I think about it, that might be the next two that get added and everything. But are there any reasons that you can think of that somebody would not appreciate Mr. Lincoln? Dan. Dan, can you hear me? Oh, you're on mute. Maybe I'm on mute. Yeah, you're on mute. Just get off mute. You're on mute. Your computer's on mute. Your computer's on mute, so I just got to take it off of mute. So you got to take it off of mute. So let's see if that's on my side or your side. Yeah, it's on your side that the computer is on mute and everything along those lines. So Dan, I think you've got to get your computer off of mute so that we can hear you on this side and everything. So I don't know if you want to pop back in and pop back out, but I do see the mute button and it's on your side and not on my side. But maybe just really quickly, Sasha, while he's getting that together, if there are any thoughts that you would have as to maybe the power of first ladies, because that is one of the arguments that I heard against Mr. Lincoln, was that maybe he was listening a little bit too much to his first lady, and therefore some of the people that were on his against him were feeling that he was letting her have too much of access to his ear in terms of influencing national policies. And this is an argument we've heard for decades, if not centuries.
Well, it's very difficult to divide and completely isolate spouse of the president. For example, I remember Michelle Obama. She was quite vocal and quite visible, and I don't think that it irritated anybody. It was part of the package. So I'm not so sure why it would affect great presidents such as Abe Lincoln, of course, was for actually carrying out his duties. It would be interesting what Dan thinks about it.
Yeah, I'd love to hear Dan's thoughts as well.
Well, I need to get on so I can see you guys. I can hear you. Oh, there you are. All right. Now I'm not going to cast aspersions on Lincoln. I know that Mary Todd Lincoln was a little bit nuts. Everyone kind of knew that. I think that he did what he could to tolerate her and just dealt with the situation best he could. It took Lincoln a lot of courage to do what he did with respect to the emancipation of the slaves and defending the Union as he did. As far as military corruption, there's always military corruption. There's military corruption now. There's military corruption in most every military in the world now. But we have a military that's supposed to be responsible to the civilian authorities. I think the Civil War was a different time. One of the problems is the South had very good generals because that was kind of a tradition among the Southern people, is to have their young men go to the military academies and get the best training. I think the North had poorer generals as a rule, but over time, the South just didn't have the resources to fend off the North, because the North had the industry and the population base, and everything else just stronger. It was a losing effort from the beginning, if you ask me. Even though the Europeans tried to intercede and create more problems, as you'd expect him to do. So no, Lincoln is still a hero of mine. He's not going to be on. He's going to be on that list. In fact, he was just ranked the top president one of the top past presidents of the United States in a recent poll, as I saw that one, and it described I don't know how many different presidents. No, Lincoln is, and he was above actually Washington, which I was kind of surprised to see. So no, Lincoln's not going to be on any bad list of mine. He'd certainly be on an epic list of presidents.
Gotcha. I can definitely see him on an epic list for sure and everything, even though some people might think that he was a little bit one of the presidents that had more control over the other legislatures and other things along those lines. So I do know some people, even in his era, that would have compared him to being a more hardliner in the sense of being in control of the other bodies, whether that's judicial, legislator, and everything along those lines. But that's actually something that we oftentimes admire of our presidents and our leaders in general, those that can
Well,
actually give their subordinates of maybe a little bit of leeway, but are also not afraid to pull them in when they are not doing what they should be doing. And that's just kind of like the good
well,
qualities of leaders in
it
general.
was an extraordinary time, right?
Right.
And so it was a good thing that the North was pulling together from a political standpoint. They had to be supportive of each other to get through it. Many people lost their lives. It was really a bloody war.
Yeah, it was definitely one of the most bloodiest wars until we got into so much other bloody wars much later and everything. We were talking earlier, and I know that Sasha is not the biggest fan of Mr. Trump, but I do know that you are a big fan. So I'm just wondering, why do you think that he should not be on the list? And by the way, he's still leading in many of the polls, including some of these polls and everything. But I was just
Well,
wondering.
I think this isn't a personality question. Really it's a question of effectiveness.
Hmm.
And Trump was very, very, very effective. In fact, he was very effective against where all the odds and everything was stacked against him. The Democrats were trying to impeach him right and left, and over stuff that really wasn't impeachable. Uh, you know, uh, I think history will tell along a story. The story in time. I think he was egotistical and a bit of a megalomaniac. Uh, you know, but when compared to Biden's sleepwalking in the presidency and all the errors he's made throughout the past year, I mean, look at, and I think Peter, if he were here, he would point out, uh, Trump has a very, very impressive list of accomplishments over the 4 years he was in office. In fact, more impressive than practically any president, and yet he's the one that's been demonized by the other side the most.
Yeah.
If I think if he wasn't such, what's the word, like a lightning strike type of personality, and could get along with people, he would have been appreciated by both sides because a lot of his policies were actually not as conservative as they looked like on the front. But his policy of making America great, I like that. Increased employment among minorities and low-income families. Increased income and employment among all classes of minorities, which I really liked. I liked the tax incentives, the scholarships for black colleges, many things that he did would sort of counter the argument that he was a racist. I don't think he was a racist. I think he has a lot of friends who are black and would never think that he was racist. I think he kind of got a bad rap from the North Carolina thing and a few other things from some of the things he said. But I see nothing in his past that indicates he's racist. He's certainly not as racist from his past as Biden is. Biden is blatantly racist in his past, has said many things to demean the black race and black men, particularly on crime and a number of different things. And he's been more harmful to black people, then Trump was helpful. Biden wasn't, and so you can't take a look at the history. It's like the Democrats want to pick and choose what whose past they want to pick apart, right? Whatever seems to be the most advantageous to their argument. Uh, Biden was excoriated by Harris in the presidential campaign
Mhm.
because he is. He's a racist. I mean, he's just out of touch. He's not, and he lied about a lot of different things in his background that said he wasn't. He's a politician. He's a career politician, been glad handling and picking the pocket of the American people and other countries for many, many years, making himself wealthy, his family wealthy, that kind of thing. Trump didn't make his family wealthy in the presidency. He's actually worse off financially than he was before he went in. How did that happen if he's so corrupt? See, the arguments just don't pass or fly for me with respect to Trump's criticisms.
Dan, may I ask you a question? I respect your opinion, and but there's something doesn't add up. If he indeed was so successful and his policies were so great, and how come he lost election, House, the Senate, twice impeached, and so on? It's kind of just doesn't add up. Never mind
It's a
Joe
mystery,
Biden.
isn't it, Sasha? It's a mystery. The only thing I can
Yes.
think of is he had a big X on his forehead with a target, and that they went after him from day one. First of all, they demonized that general. That turned out that was a big fake. The whole initial stuff with the foreign countries and all that, and the calls to the prime, all that was bullshit. None of it was legitimate, and it was proven that it wasn't legitimate.
But
It's like
Dan, along those same lines, just really quickly, and I just was curious as well about something. Is part of the problem in because we talk about some great communicators, and definitely, and I'm going to ask you a question about Reagan as well in a minute. But I definitely Reagan was seen as a great communicator. Obama was seen as a great communicator. Trump came out of the great communication era, being a TV personality and things of that nature. But I don't know that he is the greatest communicator, even though
no,
he's.
he sucked.
And that's what I was
Uh,
going to say. Is that part of the problem? Because if
he
you
was
say that
his
you
own worst enemy,
and that's
and he
that's what I was going to ask you, Dan. Because if you say you want to make America great again, I can tell you that part of the narrative that people think of is when you say that, and then you start using certain kind of flowery terms and catchphrases that get people to think that you want to take America back in time. And if you take it back in time, does that mean that you want to get the values of that time, which is what I think the message was that he was trying to get across is, or as many people perceived it, you want to go back to that time. So most people, particularly those in the African
I don't
American
think
community,
that was
don't
his
want to go to the
argument,
50s.
uh, because the policies were built around recreating the industrial complex, stronger industrial complex, more jobs in that sector, getting more favorable treaties with respect to NAFTA and the Pacific Rim Treaty, getting out of stuff that was not favorable to the United States, like the climate accords, which were so stinking one-sided that it wasn't even funny. I mean, it's ridiculous. Getting out of bad deals like the Iran treaty, which was really one-sided and ended up giving them billions of dollars without really any true accountability. Um, Look at the accomplishments from the idea from the treaty side. He got treaties in place with many of the Arab nations that working together with Israel, which is amazing. What he did, he managed to negotiate a position where Iran was the bad guy in that relationship. Iran's always been the bully in that region, and he was able to isolate them diplomatically. Some people think moving the capital and the embassy to Jerusalem was a good thing. Some see it as divisive, but I don't see him taking us back in a nostalgic era. I see him I see him moving the country forward in an American first agenda. That's different than
But
moving
and
them back into another day, another era. But I can see how someone that has liberal politics would make that argument. right?
And that's what I was going to say is I think that he allowed himself to get it framed that way because one of the things about a debate is that if you allow the opposition to frame the debate, then that's a way that you lose the debate.
Yeah,
So
but I
it's
don't
not
think
to me.
that's true because he all the accomplishments that he made, and they are legend. There are hundreds of them. Were all really kind of progressive ideas, new ideas, not old ideas, ideas that would help everyone. He got demonized on the COVID, and actually Obama, not Obama, but Biden's done a worse job than he did. He managed to accelerate the production of the vaccines, and while he even had COVID, he was able to get that fast streamed. Now they were dragging their feet because they didn't want him to be given credit for having done that, right? Because he was an enemy to corporate America on the globalist side. Anyone that was a globalist, anyone that wanted this global international consortium of cabals, they were all against Trump because it would upset the power dynamic in the way things are now in favor of a more American centric. The people with the central bank were going absolutely apeshit because he was attacking the underlying underpinnings of the world central bank, the monetary system, by controlling the Fed and turning things on its head so that America didn't keep getting screwed. And so that was a huge move forward.
I
Uh,
hear you and everything. One thing I'm going to ask you is, do you think that there are because when I think of outside presidents, and I'm sure there are others, but when I think of presidents that did not come in to the presidency from the traditional system of having gone through the political ropes and all of that, there are three that come to my mind. And actually, all three of them have been on this list at one point or another. But Carter was a peanut farmer and definitely was not that involved in the political system. He was involved to some degree,
yeah,
but much less
yeah,
than
he
a
was
lot
a
of others.
governor though. He
Right.
was a governor of
He
Georgia.
was a governor of a major state, so yes, I guess he
Yep.
would technically be there. But then the two that are totally outside is Obama and Trump, because Trump was a business leader. Now, whether he was successful or not, that's up for debate. And Obama was a community organizer. So I just wondering,
Well, he's
are there
also a
any?
U.S. senator, right?
Right. Yes, he was limited for a brief time. A brief time.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, a brief time. He wasn't really qualified to be president. From the standpoint, he'd had no background that would have prepared him to be president. He wasn't a businessman, so he had no business acumen. In fact, he and his buddies were responsible for the whole Fannie Mae Freddie Mac debacle. The Senator Bernie Frank, whatever you think of him, and the senator from Connecticut, they were all behind those low prime interest loans and that whole 8-year debacle. I mean, it was built to fail. So they set it up. It failed. Obama took advantage of that because McCain was an absolute inept politician at the time, and basically handed him the presidency by picking Palin instead of Romney.
Mm-hmm.
And because I mean, Romney was the stronger candidate, but
Mm-hmm.
had no political. They McCain was owed that opportunity, but he picked Palin. Palin was an idiot, so that was not going to do him any good. We all knew that, and so we had what we had. So you got the junior senator from Illinois as president of the United States, uh, framing everything in terms of sounding like Lincoln, but coming off as Karl Marx. I mean, you listen to his words, actual words, it was very socialistic. But if you actually listen to the delivery, it sounded like Lincoln. Because we were listening to that. He said, he sounds pretty good. I said, yeah, until you start listening to what he's actually saying. You listen to
Yes.
what he actually says. He's talking at both sides of his mouth. And, so he was effective for the left because he could sound so reasonable about everything, even though it really wasn't reasonable. And the right did not have its communication package together. One of the problems, like for example, with Bush Senior,
Mm-hmm.
is he was a freaking idiot when it came to communicating, and he didn't listen to his handlers. I mean, he couldn't have bungled the presidency worse from the standpoint of communications if he tried. If he tried, right?
And that's what I was going to ask you is how important, and this is for both you and Sasha, how important do you think it is to come out of the political system? I know that there's some people that are not the biggest fans. I've actually got a friend of mine in Vegas that was very much involved in the political system, was a political consultant, and did some other kind of work in that field. And she is not the biggest fan of AOC because she doesn't feel that AOC went through the system. So I just wonder, in terms of the presidency, do you think that you necessarily need to be a governor and or a senator, or have gone through that whole legal system in order to even be effective? Or
No, look at Reagan. Right
okay,
now, he was the California governor, and he
right,
was the great communicator.
right,
But I mean, he'd never been the president or held a national office.
right.
He got defeated a couple of times, and then he won. But he had the respect of the other side. Tip O'Neill and him were great buddies. He could communicate effectively because he was a great moderator.
Hmm.
Uh, he got nailed in the Iran Contra affair. Got in the middle of that one, but then they discovered that he wasn't all there, and so instead of going after him, they let him go because he had the Alzheimer, and Reagan accomplished a lot. The wall came down, all that. Our renewal in our faith as Americans during that period of time, because of his leadership style and his way of doing things, people had more faith in him and created more pride in our country as a result of just him being the leader.
Yeah.
Because of the way he communicated, the way he got people to get along, that kind of thing. I mean, they didn't even want to go after him because he was the way he was.
But you bring up the health issue, and that actually is actually interesting you bring that up, because at least a couple of the presidents that have been featured on this list and everything have had health issues that we did not find out about until later. So I sometimes wonder if we don't even pay enough attention to the health of our presidents when they are in office. Yes, you did mention that Trump got COVID, and I do remember that. But I mean, do we really
Well, I mean,
know about? But did we
look at
really know? Hold on a second. Did we really know about Reagan's Alzheimer's till after he got out of office? You mentioned Lincoln. I
no,
understand from history that Lincoln actually had smallpox while he was in office, but nobody realized that till after he got out of office. And
yeah,
definitely
and
FDR had issues.
I mean, and look at Biden. I mean, he's clearly got dementia and cognitive problems. He's managed by the White House staff. He can't answer questions; they don't let him. But it sets a poor example. I feel sorry for the guy, but the only reason I mean I don't want him impeached or taken out because look who's behind him. I mean that there is no competency in leadership in the Democratic Party behind him. They're just a bunch of crooks. And so, that's the best they have. It's the best they have. They ran in because they thought he could beat Trump, and whether or not he beat Trump, I don't know. Trump had more votes as a Republican candidate for president in the second election than any other Republican in history. So something's weird, and I can see Obama getting a lot of votes, but can you see Sleepy Joe getting a lot of votes?
What about Hillary?
Huh?
What about Hillary Clinton if she runs?
Against if Trump runs and it's Hillary again, Hillary has all the negatives. Uh,
She
Hil-
has, yeah, yeah.
Hillary defeated herself because she was arrogant, because she's got too many skeletons in her closet. No one likes her all that much, and they're not gonna forget all that. And all the political machine has to do is get spinning again and explain who she is and how many people were killed in mysterious circumstances and the corruption of the Clintons and their tie to Epstein and all that. I mean, it is a dirty mess with lots of Vince Foster and the education secretary being murdered with a gunshot in his head, and all these people dying that were associated with Whitewater, and all these women that were associated with Bill and Hillary. I mean, and the corruption with respect to the Russian uranium deal and a bunch of other things. I mean, and not to mention the problem with that whole issue with that raid in one of the African countries where those people were murdered, where she didn't take any responsibility and was handled very poorly. I mean, all you have to do is play the tapes from that era. She is not. She's a. You can put lipstick on the pig, but you can't make them not be a pig. She's a pig.
And speaking of pigs and everything, and like I said, glad we were having this lively discussion. I wasn't sure what was going to happen with me and Sasha, but then Dan came in and brought the fire, and I love when he does that. By the way, I did hear from Adam, and he was having some family issues that are sounding like they're very sad and all of that. But hopefully he'll be with us next week and be able to continue these conversations, or at least the week after, as we try to get through the next. Let's see, President's Day should be about 2 or 3 weeks, so we got about 2 or 3 more of these shows. But I did mention before you came on, Dan, about the Chief Justice or one of the justices retiring, and I was just wondering, as one that does study politics, how important do you think that is in the sense of how we judge presidencies? Because definitely it has to work with the different branches, whether it's legislative, judicial, and the other branches that are part of the government. But I'm just wondering, it always comes up. We definitely heard it during the Trump administration when people were worried that he was going to pick judges that aligned more with what they felt were his conservative values, even though it seems like a lot of these judges are actually towing more of a like studying the law and not necessarily going on one side or the other to make their decisions and everything along
Yeah,
those
and it's
lines.
issue by issue, right?
Right.
I don't think Chief Justice Roberts is no fan of Trump. He hates him, and there was no way was he going to listen to the election case, no matter what. And he more or less said that to the other justices. So so Trump did not have a friend with Roberts. Now, one of the things Roberts' blemish is he was involved with Epstein.
Mhm.
His kids were adopted through some sort of relationship with Epstein, and so Roberts is owned by whoever it is, right? I mean, he's not to be trusted. He shouldn't be trusted. He shouldn't. After the Epstein thing came out, he should have resigned as Chief Justice and stepped down from the court, in my mind. That would have been my preference. He didn't. He stayed, and he's created kind of a polarity in the court, or at least a bicameral approach on every issue that looks like the issue on abortion has been going more conservative, but everything else has been kind of neutral. I mean, so
Exactly. And the one that is stepping down is actually Justice Breyer. And of course, he was seen as more of a centrist. So does that mean that Biden's going to pick somebody more to the left, which then would swing it the
uh,
opposite way? And
well, the
that,
problem is the Democrats kind of screwed themselves by attacking Kavanaugh and attacking the woman who just got selected. I can't remember her name, but because the Democrats were so outrageous in what they did, it's going to make it very hard for them to get anybody through the process. It's going to, and no one will want to do it. The only person that might get through is Garland, but
mhm.
he's made himself an enemy to everybody on the right as Attorney General because he's been so partisan. And some of his decisions, including the school board decision, a number of the decisions that have demonized conservatives and other things that have been anti-free speech, he's made himself an enemy to the right. So I doubt that he could even get cleared through the Senate. He's clearly probably the most qualified person on their side of things, without getting anybody too absolutely batshit crazy. And so they're going to have someone that's fairly acceptable to everybody that can get through the proceedings, right? I mean, even Feinstein found that the woman that was selected by Trump was not offensive, was well qualified, and and everything, and it was just the other Democrats that wanted to shoot her down, and that kind of stuff has to stop. with judicial nominees. It has to stop. They've got to stop demonizing. The judiciary is different than politicians. It should be done in a very what's the word, erudite, noble, academic way that's supportable and respectful. And if there's real dirt, fine, but it, you don't turn that into a political stage. The crap with Kavanaugh was absolutely ridiculous. The whole purpose of that was to try to embarrass him to the point where he would quit.
But
Instead,
but isn't part of the problem also that there are a lot of issues that wind up being politicized that maybe they shouldn't be, but they are? Because I mean, one of the things that this Supreme Court judge is going to have to deal with, and anybody that comes in the next decades is going to have to deal with, is the whole idea of redistricting and voting maps and things of that nature. Now, whether people want to say that that's a real issue or not, meaning
well,
and then gentrification, it is definitely going to be out there in the forefront, just like things around the education system are going to be in the forefront. So,
but it's an
isn't that
issue
part
on
of the
both
problem?
sides. It's abuse. Both sides abuse the
Right,
redistricting issue,
right,
depending on who's in control, right? I mean,
right,
it's so it's not just the Republicans' hands and Democrats' hands are not clean on this,
right,
but redistricting is a political decision. It's not a judicial decision.
right.
If it's clearly, it made an interesting point the other day on the news. It was saying uh, black voters don't vote in any lower percentages than any other demographic. They're not being discriminated against in being able to vote. I mean, this isn't Crow. Still, it's everybody has an opportunity to go and vote now. I mean, it's pretty much that way. What the Democrats want to do is stack the deck against the Republicans, and the Republicans would like to stack the decks against the Democrats. And so what we're seeing is this electoral manipulation, big time. Plus, we don't know what's happened with the computers and who's screwed around with that. We know that it was suspect at the very least because
Mhm.
there are too many people who came forward and testified about it. It was never given a full hearing or airing. That's what's created the distrust of the political parties and the political system in America, is the fact that everybody's saying, "Oh, this is a false claim. This is a false claim. This is false. I've been proven false." It hasn't been proven as false. You can't say it's false without giving the evidence, and no one has, because no one has given the opportunity to present all the evidence. Right? It's all been shut down,
Yeah, and
and
that's all.
so
Yeah. Go ahead. I was going to say that that's on both sides, because I would argue that there are some efforts that have been made to, I won't say, it's not like the old way of restricting voting in certain communities, but there are certain things that are done in certain communities that may discourage voting in certain areas in terms of accessibility and things along those lines. And
oh
there are
yeah,
efforts
but
to address that.
Facebook put in $700 million to literally place all these voting boxes all over the place, where these random ballots could be anonymously dumped. That is not. I mean, I think that there should be voter ID
Mhm.
of some sort. Some sort of controlled way.
agree.
Like in Florida, they have
Right,
they have the voter motor voter. They've got
right.
you get the driver's license, you're registered, and everybody, so they've got different ways of handling it, so they can verify that you're allowed to vote.
Right.
Now, Florida doesn't like or didn't permit felons to vote. Well, that's their choice. That's a
Mhm.
state issue. In New York City, they're allowing non-citizens to vote in city elections, but they're not allowed to vote in national elections. But do
Right.
you think that they're going to be voting in national elections? They're going to try. See, that's the problem here. Is there's all of this dishonest monkey business going on. Now, whether it's probably going on both sides, I don't
Yeah.
know. The Democrats seem to be much better at it than the Republicans. Like in California, the surveying and going around and collecting ballots, and you collect the Democratic ballots, but you don't collect the Republican ballots. And then suddenly there's a big disparity in votes that didn't happen on election night, but you got all these extra ballots that they were able to canvass and count later on. Well, were they real ballots? Were they confirmed ballots? I mean, I don't know. But you see, the problem is there's such opportunity for abuse, and uh, I
And
mean that's the problem, and it doesn't build trust.
I
like
want
you
to
said,
add 2 points. Number
yes.
one, in Canada, you cannot vote without voter's ID. Period. You have no voter's ID, no vote. Bye bye. Number two, what you just said is very important, Dan, because there is erosion of Americans trusting their political system and especially election. And without fair election, uh, this is why there is calamity with this so-called the how you call it your way of electoral college.
Yeah,
It
right.
just contributes. It contributes big time. So never mind that you don't believe in your local electorate and the way to calculate the votes in election. Then it all goes to electoral college. Now we are learning that apparently 7 states created fake IDs for electors, so to enable, if it would come to that, say, Pence to dispatch the.
Well, they weren't fake. They were authorized by the legislature,
So you
which
have 2 slates of election.
which
Then
which
how
is
you
the
confirm?
alternate slate of electors, which is permissible if the election were challenged. It's not fake. It's just the alternate slate. I mean, this has happened in our history before.
Okay, and what's happened with the Pence? So which election of the 7 states do you have 2 slate of electors? One which is pro Trump and another one is against Trump. So what are you choosing? You
No, you
they
have to understand, Sasha, that in our system of elections, if there is not sufficient number of electoral votes for any particular presidential candidate, and there's a certain threshold where that's required, then it's turned over to the House of Represent or the congressional caucuses of the states to make those decisions. And so that's the alternate process, especially when someone sees there's abuse or whatever else. And the House of Representatives gets involved in it, and the Senate gets involved in it. Then it becomes another process. It's different than the electoral process entirely. And so, whether there was a constitutional basis for what Trump wanted Pence to do or not, certainly there is a law on the books that would suggest it might be, but I don't know.
Yeah, that
And
makes
so that would have been tested in the Supreme Court, right? But that was
right.
the proper place for that to be tested, and not what happened.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and we get ready to wind down everything. But just to let you all know, and all of that, well, one for every, I do agree that there's kind of, as you call it, Dan, monkey business on both sides and everything. And for every Florida, I mean, for every Californian, I know that folks that are more on the conservative side are not the biggest fans of California. I'm not saying I'm the biggest fan of California either. There are some things that I like about it. There's things that I don't like, and I consider myself more liberal to moderate. But for every California, there's a Texas, and for every New York, there's a Florida. So that is my way of saying that that is going on both sides, because we know Texas is definitely a strong Republican base, as is Florida a strong Republican base as well, if California and New York are Democratic bases. So I do think that it happens on both sides of the aisle, and that's something that needs to be addressed. I also think that we probably have to have some major changes within the political system. But coming back to our discussions, and we're doing these on a weekly basis. I know that next week some of our regulars, and I do hope that Adam will be able to join us, but I do know he was dealing with a family situation and all
Yeah,
of
sorry
that.
to hear
And
that.
yes, and definitely, hopefully, he will be able to join us next week and continue, because he's always giving us lively discussions and all of that. But the vote this time around, because we usually eliminate the bottom two, was unfortunately Trump is still winning most of the votes. But who knows? It's LinkedIn, so Lincoln may be a bunch of anti-Trumpers. I don't know, but right
Yeah.
now he is still leading the list and
Now,
everything. And Clinton
I
is in second place. Hold on one second, Dan. I was going to let you finish and everything. Clinton is in second place, and Reagan is in third place, and Lincoln. And I do know that Kim, one of our founders, wanted Lincoln on the list. He did get 4% of the vote, so there were some people that joined with her in not liking Lincoln. So hopefully she'll come by next week and explain what she wanted to hear more people learn about Lincoln that is unfavorable. I do know the whole Mary Todd situation, and of course the whole thing around this Civil War and things of that nature. But I'm guessing it's somewhere in that conversation. But I don't want to speak for the lady since we haven't had that conversation either online or directly by iPhone or in person or anything of that nature. So I'm not going to speak for somebody without at least first giving them a chance to speak for themselves. That being said, and before Dan and Sasha give their final points and everything, as we were talking, I am trying to decide one of two things because I always drop off the bottom two, which means that unfortunately, Abraham Lincoln is going to go and get eliminated from our list, and Mr. Reagan is going to get eliminated. And by the way, there were things about Mr. Reagan that I did not like, even though there were some other things about him that I did like. And I do feel that he did get some sympathy support when he had that assassination attempt on him, because there were some policy things that I personally did not like during that time, and I was a very young man at that time. I was in college age and all of that. But that being said, I think that I'm going to add maybe one more historical figure, just because I'm having fun adding historical figures and everything. So this time I'm going to pull out George Washington. I don't know why anybody would not like George Washington, but we're going to see if anybody doesn't like George Washington and why they don't like him. And for comedy father, I've not gone in after Ford, so I'm going to add Ford to the list as well. So the next one will be Trump, Clinton, Washington, and Ford. I thought about Pierce, but nobody knows who the heck Pierce is. So Pierce might
Jefferson. How about Jefferson?
Hey,
Next in line.
Huh?
Next in line.
Next in line. Jefferson's next in line. Yes, Jefferson's next in line.
Now, I will say this about Trump. I don't want to see him run in 2024. I think he'd be better because he's so divisive. I would rather see him support DeSantis, who supports his political positions and is not as divisive and is a good governor, and people and they have respect. But I think making Trump the president again is a big mistake because of his divisiveness, and I think that would be a powder keg. I think that'd be a big mistake. For the betterment of the country, I hope he doesn't run, not because I don't think he was an effective president. I think he was, but I think things are so divisive now. It would create a huge fissure in the United States, and it might even lead to civil war. I don't want that.
Dan, I agree with every your word. And apparently, think about something. Trump is being prosecuted, and in a few months' time, he will be dismantled. That's what I think will happen eventually.
No, don't think
in
so.
Georgia, remember his call, I need 11,800 votes. I mean, this is a treasonous action, really, just by itself. If he wouldn't done anything else but just that, that's enough to do anything. It's illegal, it's criminal, and so on. But we'll see how it will develop. Then his issue with his Trump Corporation in New York, which now being dismantled, and people will go to jail because of that was a criminal organization. And we will see more of that in the next few weeks. But apparently, what's interesting, Dan, what's interesting, I want to give you a credit that all that in Georgia and in New York with Trump organization, that happened after his presidency and before his presidency. So whatever he did as president, there were some things that he should have handled better, for sure, even situation with COVID and many other things. But he did some good things, for sure. I would like to admit that. But everything what he did before his presidency and after his presidency, and what he did after, it's really, really despicable. And if your theory is correct that at a certain point it would all go to House of Representatives, and then it would go at the end of the day to Supreme Court anyway, you know what I would propose? Just cancel election. You don't need election. Go to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court will appoint the president. It's the end of story. How about that? It will save a lot of time and money.
Could be an interesting
so
idea,
funny.
and we could have a whole new election system. I know a lot of people would love to get even third-party candidates to have some votes outside of the Democrats and the Republicans, because, as Dan just pointed out, a lot of people also feel that they are the same side, the opposite sides of the same coin, meaning that they often have a lot more similarities than they do differences, even though they are some things that they may be one side more prone to than the other. Like one might be more business and the other may be more social causes and things along those lines. But that being said, we're done with the show on this week. I do hope, Dan, that you can join us again next week. I always enjoy your conversation, even some of the things that I agree with and some of the things that I don't agree with, and the same with Sasha. But I love our friendship, our bonding together here on this lovely network that is soon getting ready to go to Roku and all of that. I know me and Sasha will be on the new show in almost a little bit over 12 hours and all of that. But that being said, definitely look forward to having great conversations and look forward to seeing you pop back in on some of our other shows, because I know Dan's even popped in on my shows as well. So always glad to see you come in and give your insight. So I think I'm gonna use that lovely image that we use for the news edition, which is people coming and going and trying to travel around. And that's the one that we use for the news show as well. So I'm gonna hit that one and get us on out of here. But thank y'all for joining, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Fun.
Good night.
Thank you. Take care. Good night.
Good night.